Hello, my name is Mike Hobby, and I'm going to speak today about the anti-literacy laws that were placed on African Americans in this country in the 1800s. To understand the anti-literacy laws is to understand the history behind them and why they were created and implemented in the first place. Anti-literacy laws were part of a larger set of laws that were put into place to keep people of color oppressed even after their freedom from slavery. These laws became commonly known as the Jim Crow laws and were in place for almost 100 years, ending in 1964 when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. These laws were meant to deny African Americans the right to vote, obtain, and hold jobs, get an education, or any other opportunities that may allow them to rise in society. These Jim Crow laws were the Deep South's retaliation to the 13th Amendment, which effectively ended slavery in the United States. In essence, the Jim Crow laws were legal indentured servitude and segregation between African Americans and whites. Specifically, these anti-literacy laws were put into place as a way to prohibit African Americans from voting or becoming literate. During this time period, in order to vote, people had to pass a literacy test. As long as it was illegal to teach literacy to African Americans, white people could control the voting, thus controlling politics and future laws. There was also the thought that if African Americans became literate, it would be easier for them to come together and rise against the oppression placed on them by white people. Being illiterate left African Americans unorganized and unable to rise in society. Pictured here is Margaret Douglas. Margaret Douglas was an important figure in the fight against anti-literacy laws. In 1853, she was arrested for teaching African American children how to read and write. During her trial, Douglas made the point that if she was guilty of teaching African American children literacy, the church was also an accomplice in this act. Acting as her own counsel, she called 3 prominent church members to the stand and questioned them about the teaching of literacy in Sunday school to these same African American children that she was teaching in school. While it was obvious that these men knew that literacy was being taught to these same children during Sunday school, the men deflected these questions, claiming ignorance and that Sunday school was actually the women's job at the church and they knew nothing about it. This put the church in a tough position as they wished to teach African American children how to read and write so they could participate in the worship and spread the word of God, yet it was technically illegal to teach African American literacy due to these anti-literacy laws. Even though Douglas was found guilty and sentenced to 1 month in jail with a fine of $1, the consensus of the public was beginning to change about these anti-literacy laws that were in place. This was one of the beginning of the movements that officially ended segregation in 1954 with one of the most famous court cases in American history. In Brown versus the Board of Education, the Supreme Court ruled that educational segregation was unconstitutional, which brought an end to the separate but equal mindset in the educational realm.